When you Google how to compost, you'll get 5 different answers from 5 different people, and all of them are a little bit right and a little bit wrong for your specific situation. That's because composting isn't one process. It's a category. Cold, hot, vermi, bokashi, trench, they're all doing the same basic job. Breaking down organic matter down into something that your soil can use. But they're using completely different biology to get there at completely different speeds with completely different trade-offs. I'm Sunny, and today we're going through all 5 so that you can figure out which one or which combination actually fits your yard the best. Let's start with the one that almost everybody's already doing, whether they mean to or not. Cold composting. This is the pile in the corner of your yard. You throw in leaves, grass clippings, kitchen scraps, and you basically leave it alone. Maybe you turn it a few times a year. Maybe you don't. Biologically, this is decomposition running at ambient temperature, driven by mesophilic bacteria and fungi, the organisms that are happy in the 50 to 100 degree Fahrenheit range. Because you're not actively managing the carbon to nitrogen ratio or the moisture, the process is slow. You're looking at 6 months to 2 years before you've got any finished compost. The upside is honestly the whole appeal. It takes almost no labor and almost no attention. You don't need a thermometer, you don't need a turning schedule, you just need patience. The downside is that cold piles don't reliably get hot enough to kill weed seeds or pathogens. So if you're tossing in anything with matured seed heads, then expect some of those seeds to survive and show up in your beds next spring. Hot composting is the opposite philosophy. Same basic inputs, but managed aggressively for speed. The target here is a carbon to nitrogen ratio around 25 to 1. Enough volume to hold heat, usually about a cubic yard minimum, and consistent moisture around what people describe as a wrung out sponge. Get those 3 things right and thermophilic bacteria take over, and internal temperatures climb to, you want it to be at least 131 degrees Fahrenheit. At that range, you're not just decomposing faster, you're pasteurizing the pile. Weed seeds, most pathogens, they don't survive sustained heat in that zone. And because the biology is running so much faster, you can go from raw material to finished compost a lot faster than you can with cold composting. You need the right carbon to nitrogen mix from the start, which usually means mixing together browns like dried leaves or wood chips with greens like food scraps or fresh grass or manure. You need enough mass to hold the temperature, and you need to actually turn it, which can be a real physical labor if you're doing it by hand. And as a side note, if you're buying compost from a commercial vendor, by law, that compost has to have gone through a thermophilic or hot composting process. Now, there are lots of different ways that you can hot compost, from turning it in your backyard, or on a larger scale, you can do static aeration compost or windrow compost. Those all fall into the category of hot composting. Now, this is the one I spend most of my time on, so I'll just try to keep myself from turning this into a 45-minute tangent. Vermicomposting swaps thermophilic bacteria for red wiggler earthworms, also known as Eisenia fetida. The worms eat the organic material, and their gut passes it through a combination of mechanical grinding and microbial digestion. And what comes out of the other end is worm castings, a finished product that's structurally and biologically different from either cold or hot compost. Now, what makes castings distinct isn't just the nutrient content, it's the microbial density and the humic substances that come out of the gut process. Peer-reviewed comparisons, including the work from Tomati and colleagues back in the late 80s, found plant growth responses from vermicompost that go beyond what you'd expect from nutrients alone. There's a biological signaling component happening there too. The catch is that worms are more particular than bacteria. They can't handle high heat, so this isn't a system for a pile that's actively cooking. And the whole system runs slower in terms of volume. You're not going to process a truckload of yard waste in a bin. You're processing food scraps and select materials at a worm's pace, which is worth it for the end product, but it's a different scale of operation than a hot pile. And if you're as geeky about compost as I am and you would like to support this channel even further, the best way to do that is to grab a Compost Nerd t-shirt like the one I'm wearing here. I'll leave a link in the description below. Bokashi is the odd one out on this list because it's not really composting at all, it's fermentation. And the distinction actually matters for how you use it. The process uses an inoculant, usually bran or some other carbon carrier, loaded with lactic acid bacteria, yeast, and phototrophic bacteria, layered with food scraps in a sealed, airtight container. Because it's anaerobic, this is one of those only home methods that can handle meat, dairy, and cooked foods without the odor and pest problems those materials could cause in an open pile. In about 3 weeks, the material comes out pickled, not decomposed. That's the key thing people miss. Bokashi doesn't finish the job. What comes out of the bucket is acidic and needs a second stage. Either buried directly in the soil for a few weeks to finish breaking down, or added to an existing hot or cold pile to let aerobic decomposition take over from there. So Bokashi's real strength is as a pre-processing step, not a standalone system. It expands what you're allowed to put into the loop, but it hands off to one of the other 4 methods to actually finish the material. Last one, and really it's kind of the simplest of all of them, trench composting. You dig a hole or a trench, usually 12 to 18 inches deep, bury kitchen scraps or other organic material directly and cover it with soil. There's no pile to manage, no turning, no bin. Decomposition happens in place, driven by soil-dwelling organisms, and if you've got them, earthworms already living in that ground. Because everything happens below the surface, there's no odor and no pest pressure, which makes it one of the lowest maintenance options on this list. The downside is capacity and control. You're limited by how much digging you are willing to do, and you are not managing temperature or moisture at all. So it's slow and unpredictable. Closer to cold composting in terms of timeline. It also means whatever spot you bury your material in is out of production for a stretch while it breaks down. So it works best in rotation, moving trench to trench across a bed over season. Because for it to work effectively, you have to plant your plants exactly over where you dug the trench the fall before. Now, here's the thing I actually want you to walk away with. These 5 methods, they aren't competing with each other. In a well-run system, they're stages. Bokashi handles the meat, dairy, and cooked scraps that nothing else on this list can touch and hands them off pre-fermented. A hot pile takes your bulk yard waste, your weeding material, anything that you want pasteurized, and turns it around fast. Vermicomposting takes your cleaner food scraps and produces a concentrated, biologically active product for seed starter and high-value beds. Trench composting handles overflow and works soil in place without any infrastructure at all. And cold composting is just what happens to whatever's left over with 0 effort required. Now look, I'm not saying that you have to run all 5. Most home gardeners land on 2, maybe 3, based on how much space, time, and material they've actually got. But understanding what each one is doing biologically means you can build a system instead of just picking a method off a list and hoping it fits. For example, I like to do hot composting to break everything down, and once it cools, I feed that compost to my worms for my worm castings. So that's the lineup: cold, hot, vermi, bokashi, and trench. 5 different biological processes solving the same problem at 5 different speeds. And tell me in the comments which method that you prefer, or tell me if I've missed one. And if you want to go deeper on the vermicomposting side specifically, that's kind of what this whole channel was built around. So stick around, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.